280 guests watched my daughter introduce a complete stranger as her father. My name is Logan Foster, and I had just written checks totaling $250,000 for her wedding. Think about that moment. Your own flesh and blood announcing to an entire ballroom that you're dead while embracing another man she calls Dad. Meanwhile, every centerpiece, every champagne flute, every rose petal on that marble floor was paid for by the supposedly deceased father sitting alone at table 23. What Charlotte failed to understand when she erased me from her life story? Every contract had my signature. Every deposit came from my company accounts. And I held the final payment of $175,000 that would keep her perfect reception running past the cocktail hour. 24 years of raising her. 5 months planning her dream wedding. One moment of complete betrayal that changed everything. The outcome shocked even me. And it definitely wasn't what those Bethesda socialites expected from a simple furniture maker in a rented tuxedo. I sat there watching her float through the crowd in her $28,000 Marchesa gown, accepting congratulations from people who had no idea who really funded this fairy tale. The Wallaces, her new in-laws, circled her like proud parents, introducing her to their social circle as if they'd discovered her, molded her, made her who she was. Harrison Wallace, the distinguished patriarch, kept his arm around a silver-haired gentleman in a custom tuxedo, Julian Stiles, the man my daughter now called Father, a man who had never packed her lunches, never taught her to drive, never stayed up all night when she had the flu. My rental tuxedo felt tight around my neck as I watched Charlotte deliberately avoid eye contact with me. 5 months of planning, countless meetings with vendors, endless email chains about flower arrangements and menu selections, all with my name on the invoices, all paid from my accounts. And now I held the final check that would determine whether this evening continued in champagne-soaked splendor or collapsed under the weight of truth. Before I tell you how this story ends, I have to ask, have you ever been invisible in a room full of people celebrating something you made possible? Have you ever watched others take credit for your sacrifices? That particular sting of erasure while your contribution keeps the lights on? If this story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button now. I share real stories about everyday justice, moments when truth breaks through facades and reality demands its due. I'd love to know where you're watching from, because these human experiences connect us across cities, countries, and continents. My channel explores what happens when people forget who helped them climb the ladder, and the natural consequences that follow. Not revenge, exactly. Just the universe restoring balance when the bills come due in ways no one anticipates. Tonight's story isn't just about a wedding. It's about what we teach our children when we allow them to rewrite history. It's about the moment when a father must decide between maintaining a pleasant fiction and standing for something real. The Wallaces believed their social connections and family name gave them immunity from consequences. They'd never encountered someone who built their reputation through decades of honest work, one satisfied customer at a time. They understood inherited status, not earned respect. My daughter had forgotten something essential. When you construct a life on deception, you build on sand. And when the tide rises, as it always does, even the most elaborate structures wash away. So settle in. This story has turns you won't expect, moments that will make you question what you would do if facing the same betrayal, and an ending that proves sometimes the most powerful statement is simply standing in your truth. Because tonight, my daughter learned that some debts must be paid in full. The Oak Ridge Estate in Bethesda, Maryland. Saturday, May 18th, 2024, 5:45 in the evening. I pulled my 2021 Ford F-250 into the valet line behind a procession of Range Rovers and Teslas. The attendant couldn't have been more than 19. He looked at my truck like I'd brought a farm animal to dinner. But he took my keys anyway. Professional courtesy, I suppose. My rental tuxedo felt like a Halloween costume, $125 for the night. Meanwhile, every other man wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I could tell by the tailoring. You don't build a custom furniture business for 25 years without learning to recognize quality craftsmanship versus surface appearance, but they had no idea who was actually funding their champagne. Inside, crystal chandeliers worth $30,000 each illuminated 280 of Maryland's most influential. The guest list read like a who's who of old money and new tech wealth. Families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university research centers. And there was Charlotte, my daughter, gliding through the crowd in her $28,000 Marchesa gown. She spotted me enter. Our eyes met briefly across the room. She looked away. A coordinator with a tablet approached me. "You must be—" She checked her list. "Table 23. Table 23. By the service entrance, where wait staff rushed through with trays, where the music was just a bit too loud, where families seat the relatives they're obligated to invite, but don't want to acknowledge. That's me." "That's right," I said, and Charlotte was at table 1, center of the room, under perfect lighting, with her new family, the Wallaces. Mason Wallace was her husband-to-be. Harrison Wallace owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast. They had wealth that dated back to when my grandparents were still working factory jobs in Detroit. I took my seat and watched Charlotte navigate the room. She moved differently now, practiced, as if she'd been born to this world. When guests asked about her family, she'd point toward table 1 and smile. "My father's right over there," she'd say, gesturing toward a distinguished man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and a bespoke tuxedo. Julian Stiles. I'd never met this man in my life. Meanwhile, my table filled with distant cousins and forgotten acquaintances. Pleasant people, but not the type mentioned in the Maryland social pages. We discussed the weather and the venue's architecture. No one asked what I did for work, probably for the best. The venue itself was a statement of excess, a converted historic mansion on 12 acres of manicured grounds. The ballroom where we sat featured hand-painted ceilings, marble columns, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking illuminated gardens. The tables were adorned with arrangements of white orchids and roses, each centerpiece worth more than what most people spend on groceries in a month. A 5-piece string ensemble played classical music in the corner, their instruments probably worth more than my first workshop. Servers in crisp black and white moved efficiently between tables, pouring champagne that cost $300 a bottle. The Wallace family crest was embossed on everything: napkins, programs, even the chocolate truffles served with coffee. I watched Charlotte laugh at something Harrison Wallace said, her head tilted back in practiced delight. She'd perfected that laugh at Brown University, where her communications degree cost me $74,000 a year. The same laugh she used when introducing Julian Stiles to yet another guest as my father, who made all this possible. The irony would be comical if it weren't so painful, because Julian Stiles hadn't made any of this possible. The man who had, the man who built furniture with his hands for 25 years, who saved and invested and grew a business from nothing, sat at table 23 next to the kitchen, watching his daughter pretend he didn't exist. 24 years of raising that girl. 24 years of skinned knees and bedtime stories and dance recitals. I missed exactly 2 birthdays, both because I was installing custom pieces for clients with impossible deadlines. Handcrafted furniture doesn't assemble itself, but I always made it up to her. Always. I paid for her private school when public education wasn't challenging enough. $22,000 a year for Westridge Academy. I paid for her college. Brown, no less. $74,000 a year for 4 years. I paid for her apartment in Georgetown when she couldn't find work after graduation that matched her potential. $3,200 a month for nearly 3 years. And now I was paying for this wedding. Every detail. The venue rental, $85,000. The catering, $48,000. The flowers, $22,000. The live classical musicians, $18,000. The photographer, $15,000. The 5-tier cake, $17,500. But Charlotte had made one critical miscalculation in her eagerness to infiltrate Bethesda's elite social circle. She'd forgotten to read the payment schedule in her dream wedding contract. The cocktail hour stretched on, and the distance between my table and hers felt like miles of emotional terrain. I watched Charlotte pose for photos with the Wallaces, playing the role of the grateful daughter they'd apparently rescued from obscurity. Every smile felt like a slap across my face. If I stayed silent tonight, I'd lose more than money. I'd lose my self-respect. Let me tell you what 25 years of building Foster custom furnishings really meant. Started in 1999 with a used truck, a workshop in my garage, and my grandfather's tools. Worked 15-hour days, 6 days a week for the first 7 years. Lived on ramen and determination. But I didn't just build tables and chairs. I paid attention. I listened when clients talked about their homes and needs. I learned that the lawyer with the wobbly dining set was renovating investment properties. I designed for him, then bought in as a silent partner, then another, then another. Today, Foster Interiors and Design Group. We handle everything from single custom pieces to complete mansion fit-outs. Last year's revenue, $6.7 million. Net profit margin, 22%. Charlotte knew none of this. In her mind, I was still the man who came home with sawdust in his hair and calluses on his hands. The man who embarrassed her at parent-teacher conferences because I wore jeans instead of slacks. The man who wasn't refined enough for her Ivy League friends. She had no idea that her simple furniture maker dad now employed 38 artisans and designers across 3 states and had pieces featured in Architectural Digest twice last year. But staying quiet meant accepting that she was ashamed of everything I'd built. It meant watching her construct a marriage on deception. It meant teaching her that family loyalty was negotiable based on social standing. The first time Charlotte showed signs of this transformation was during her sophomore year at Brown. I drove up to Providence for Parents' Weekend in my work truck. When I arrived at her dorm, she asked if we could meet at the restaurant instead. "Parking is so difficult on campus," she explained. Later, I overheard her tell her roommate I was a family friend who'd helped her move in. Not her father. A family friend. I said nothing then. Chalked it up to college insecurity. We all go through phases of reinvention. But the pattern continued. When she graduated, she introduced me to her professors as her guardian. When she moved to Georgetown, she told neighbors I was her uncle. Each time I swallowed my hurt and told myself it was temporary. She would outgrow this phase. She would eventually become secure enough to embrace her roots. Instead, the distance grew. Our weekly calls became monthly. Her visits home dwindled. When she met Mason Wallace at a gallery opening, she didn't bring him to meet me for 6 months. And when she did, she gave him a sanitized version of her childhood. Yes, her father made furniture, but as an artistic pursuit, not as a livelihood. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Charlotte. "Dad, please don't mention your workshop tonight. This is important to me." 25 years of sacrifice reduced to an embarrassment to be managed. I looked around at the crystal and the gold and the flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At the guests who'd never sanded wood or worried about meeting payroll. At my daughter, who'd learned to be ashamed of the very qualities that made all this possible. The decision crystallized in that moment because some lessons can only be taught the hard way. I excused myself from table 23 and walked to the restroom, passing the bar where Harrison Wallace held court with his country club friends. They didn't notice me, just another rental tuxedo in their peripheral vision. Inside the marble bathroom, I pulled out my phone and texted Caleb Malone, my attorney. "Are you outside?" 3 dots appeared immediately. "Parked across the street. Everything ready." "Come in. Bring the folder." I splashed water on my face and straightened my bow tie. The bathroom attendant handed me a towel. I tipped him $50. "Nice wedding," he said. "We'll see," I replied. Back in the ballroom, I caught Abigail Ross's eye. The venue manager nodded slightly, acknowledging our earlier conversation. She knew exactly who was funding this evening and what would happen if the final payment didn't arrive by 9:15 p.m. The contract was explicit: full payment due before dinner service or immediate termination of event. The cocktail hour was winding down. Guests migrated toward their assigned tables. I watched Charlotte lean close to Mason, whispering something that made him laugh. His father, Harrison, clapped Julian Stiles on the shoulder like they were old friends. The fake father, the man who'd never stayed up all night with a feverish Charlotte, never taught her to drive in empty parking lots on Sunday mornings, never built her a custom desk for her first apartment. I opened my jacket, touching the envelope containing a check for $175,000, the final payment. My leverage. Caleb appeared at the entrance, leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He nodded once. Inside that portfolio, copies of every contract, every bank statement, every email confirming my role as the financial backer of this entire production. Proof that Julian Stiles hadn't contributed a single dollar. A woman approached my table, Elizabeth Wallace, Mason's mother. Her diamond necklace probably cost more than my first workshop. "You must be Charlotte's creative father," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "How nice you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. "I've invested quite a lot in this evening." "Yes, well, we're all so grateful you could contribute." She glanced at my rental tuxedo. "It's wonderful to see Charlotte finding her place in the right circles. The Stiles family has such connections." I smiled. "Julian Stiles isn't Charlotte's father." Elizabeth blinked rapidly. "I'm sorry?" "Julian Stiles met Charlotte exactly 3 times before today. I'm her father. I raised her. Alone." Elizabeth's smile tightened. "Well, families are complicated these days, aren't they? We're just happy Charlotte has found proper guidance." As she walked away, I caught Abigail Ross checking her watch. 8:30 p.m., 45 minutes until payment deadline. A few tables over, a man kept glancing my way. I recognized him, James Thornton, whose custom library I'd completed last year. He excused himself from his table and approached. "Logan Foster? I almost didn't recognize you without sawdust in your hair." He extended his hand. "Your work transformed my home office." "Thank you, James. I didn't realize you were connected to the bride." "I'm her father." His eyebrows shot up. "Her father? But I thought—" "That's Julian Stiles at the head table," I said. "Charlotte's preferred version of a father." James frowned. "That doesn't make sense." Your company is one of the most respected custom furniture operations on the East Coast. My interior designer practically begged to work with you. Charlotte doesn't know about the company's growth. She left for college when we were still small. In her mind, I'm still just a guy with a workshop. James looked toward the head table, then back at me. What are you going to do? I checked my watch. Wait about 30 more minutes. Across the room, I noticed other guests starting to recognize me. A woman who'd commissioned a dining set last year. A couple whose vacation home I'd furnished. The whispers began to spread. That's Logan Foster, the furniture maker. His pieces are in the governor's mansion. The string quartet transitioned to dinner music. Servers prepared to bring out the first course. Abigail Ross approached the microphone for announcements. I caught Charlotte's eye across the room. For a moment, something like worry crossed her face. She knew the payment schedule as well as I did. She knew what was coming due, but she had no idea what else was coming. The first course arrived, butter-poached lobster on beds of microgreens, $85 per plate. Conversations hummed around the ballroom as guests admired the presentation. At the head table, Harrison Wallace stood and tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The room quieted. "Friends and family," he began, voice carrying effortlessly. "What a joy to welcome you to this celebration of Mason and Charlotte's union. As we begin this magnificent dinner, I want to acknowledge the man who has guided Charlotte to become the exceptional young woman she is today." My grip tightened around my water glass. "Julian Stiles," Harrison continued, gesturing to the silver-haired man beside him. "Charlotte's father and a dear friend. Julian, your daughter is a credit to your guidance." Julian stood, accepting the praise with practiced humility. "Thank you, Harrison. Watching Charlotte grow into the woman she's become has been the greatest privilege of my life." Across the room, more guests were noticing me. The whispers continued. "That's Logan Foster. His furniture is in the Smithsonian collection. He's worth millions." Charlotte's eyes darted nervously between Julian and me. She leaned over to whisper something to Mason, who glanced in my direction with a frown. Julian raised his glass. "To my beautiful daughter on her wedding day." "To Charlotte," the room echoed. Charlotte stood, embracing Julian. "I love you, Dad," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I checked my watch. 8:45 p.m. 30 minutes until payment deadline. Abigail Ross appeared at my side. "Mr. Foster, I need to confirm the final payment will be processed as scheduled." "That depends," I said. "Sir, without confirmation, I'll need to inform the kitchen to halt dinner service after the first course." "I understand." She lowered her voice. "This would be extremely unusual." "So is a daughter erasing her father from existence." Abigail hesitated. "The payment deadline is 9:15. "I'm aware." As she walked away, Caleb slid into the empty chair beside me. "Everything's ready," he said quietly. "Are you sure about this?" "Completely." "It's going to cause a scene." "That's the point." At a nearby table, a woman was staring openly at me. I recognized her. Harper Jenkins, society columnist for the Bethesda magazine. She excused herself and approached. "Mr. Foster?" "Harper Jenkins. I'm confused about something. I was told Julian Stiles is the father of the bride, but several guests are saying you're Charlotte's father." "I am." "Then who is Julian Stiles?" "A man my daughter met 3 times before today." Harper's eyes widened. "And you're allowing this misrepresentation for approximately 25 more minutes." She studied me. "You're the Logan Foster of Foster Interiors and Design Group?" "I am." Your company did the governor's residence renovation last year. We did. And you're sitting at table 23, while another man claims to be your daughter's father. For now. Harper pulled out her phone. Mr. Foster, there's clearly a story here. There certainly is, and you'll have exclusive access to it in about 20 minutes. She glanced toward the head table. Does Charlotte know what you're planning? She's about to find out. The first course plates were being cleared. Servers prepared to bring out the main course. Wagyu beef with truffle reduction, 170 filers per plate. Charlotte was laughing at something Mason said, her hand resting on Julian's arm. The perfect picture of family harmony. I stood up. Logan, Caleb cautioned, once you do this, there's no going back. She made her choice, I said. Now I'm making mine. I began walking toward the head table. Conversations quieted as I passed. The Wallace family noticed my approach, expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. Charlotte's smile froze on her face. 8:55 p.m. 20 minutes until payment deadline. Harrison Wallace stood, intercepting me before I reached their table. Can I help you? He asked, voice low but firm. I'm here to speak with my daughter. I believe you're confused. Julian is Charlotte's father. Julian is a prop in a performance. I'm Logan Foster. I raised Charlotte, alone, since she was 4 years old. Harrison's expression hardened. This is inappropriate. Whatever your connection to Charlotte might be, this is neither the time nor place to discuss it. Actually, it's exactly the time and place, since I'm paying for it. Excuse me? Every centerpiece, every champagne flute, every lobster tail. My name is on every contract. Harrison's confident facade cracked slightly. That's impossible. Julian handled the financial arrangements. Did he show you receipts? Contracts? Bank statements? Harrison glanced back at the head table, where Julian was now watching us intently. Charlotte had gone pale. Mr. Wallace, I said, your family has been deceived. And in about 15 minutes, this wedding reception will come to an abrupt halt unless the final payment of $175,000 is made. Would you like to cover that? Harrison's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening to ruin my son's wedding? I'm explaining the consequences of my daughter's choices. Charlotte stood now, moving toward us with panic in her eyes. Dad, she said, addressing me directly for the first time that evening, please don't do this. Which dad are you talking to, Charlotte? The real one or the rental? Guests at nearby tables had gone silent, watching the drama unfold. The string quartet faltered, musicians sensing the tension. 9 p.m. 15 minutes until truth would have its moment. I took the microphone with steady hands. The room fell silent as I adjusted it to my height, a small detail that somehow emphasized I wasn't part of their rehearsed production. My name is Logan Foster, I announced, voice clear and unwavering, and I'm Charlotte's father. The effect was immediate. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Wine glasses froze halfway to lips. 280 guests turned to stare at the man who had just disrupted their perfect evening. Charlotte's face drained of color. Mason stepped forward protectively, but I raised my hand. For the past hour, you've been celebrating the wonderful father who raised my daughter. I gestured toward Julian Stiles, who seemed to be shrinking into his chair. That man has never changed Charlotte's diapers, never stayed up all night when she had the flu, never taught her to drive. In fact, he met her exactly 3 times before today. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough for everyone to hear. Harrison, I continued, looking directly at Wallace, I appreciate your kind words about integrity and values, but you directed them at the wrong person. Caleb appeared at my side, portfolio open. He handed me a folder of documents, bank statements, contracts, email printouts, evidence. This is the contract for tonight's venue, I said, holding up the papers. Signed by Logan Foster. That's me. This is the catering agreement for $48,000, also signed by Logan Foster. The flower contract for $22,000. The musician contract for $18,000. Every single vendor agreement for this evening. I could see faces in the crowd shifting from confusion to understanding. Emily Thompson was nodding grimly. James Thornton looked sick. The total cost of this wedding is $250,000, every penny paid by Foster Interiors and Design Group. That's my company. Charlotte found her voice. Dad, please don't. Don't what? I asked, my tone still calm but carrying more edge now. Don't tell the truth? Don't embarrass you? Don't exist? Harrison stepped forward. Now see here, you can't just… I can't what? Pay for my daughter's wedding? Because that's exactly what I did. I held up my phone, showing the banking app. This is the business account for Foster Interiors. Current balance, $1.4 million. Tonight's wedding expenses transferred in full. The room was completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. Foster Interiors and Design Group, I continued, is a business I built over 25 years. We started with custom furniture and expanded into high-end interior design. 38 employees, $6.7 million in annual revenue. Not bad for a simple woodworker. Abigail approached the stage, flanked by her staff. Mr. Foster, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We need to discuss the final payment authorization. Perfect timing, I said. Of course, Abigail. You need the final $175,000 before you can complete tonight's service. Harrison looked confused. What final payment? Everything was arranged by me, I said, through my company. The Wallace family has no financial involvement in tonight's celebration. I turned back to the crowd, many of whom were now pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming the most dramatic moment in Bethesda's social history. For 5 months, Charlotte asked me not to mention my business at wedding events. She was embarrassed that her father was just a furniture maker. She wanted to fit into her new social circle. I understood that. I wanted her to be happy. Charlotte's tears were flowing freely now, but not tears of joy. But tonight, she went further. She told you all that her father was dead. She introduced a complete stranger as the man who raised her. She erased 24 years of our relationship to maintain her social status. The crowd was restless now. Whispered conversations, shocked expressions, phones recording everything. Harrison, I said, addressing Wallace directly. You spoke beautifully about family loyalty and doing what's right. You praised the values that shaped Charlotte into the woman she is today. But you gave credit to the wrong man. I held up a printed email thread. These are communications between Charlotte and wedding planner Abigail Ross. 42 emails over 5 months. Charlotte was copied on every message. She knew exactly who was funding her dream wedding. Harper from the magazine was recording everything, her photographer capturing the stunned expressions around the room. So now we come to the final payment, I said, addressing Abigail but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. $175,000 to complete tonight's service. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. The final payment Abigail needed. The check that would keep the reception running smoothly. The room held its breath. Abigail, as the client whose signature appears on every contract, I have a question. Does this venue provide service to people who are ashamed of their families? Abigail looked trapped. Sir, because I'm not interested in funding a celebration of my own erasure. I looked at the check in my hands. $175,000 made out to Oak Ridge Estate Services, signed and ready. Then I tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper carried across the silent room like a thunderclap. The contracts are void, I announced. No final payment means no continued service. I believe that's standard business practice. Charlotte screamed. Not a cry of surprise, a full-throated scream of panic and rage. You can't do this, she shouted. This is my wedding. Yes, I said calmly. It was. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. Charlotte launched herself toward the stage, her expensive gown trailing behind her like an accusation. Dad, you can't. Please, there has to be another way. But there wasn't another way. That's what she'd never understood about business. When you make certain choices, you eliminate certain options. When you burn bridges, you can't walk back across them. Mason grabbed my arm. You're insane. You can't destroy my wife's wedding over some petty grudge. It's not a grudge, I said, shaking off his grip. It's a lesson in consequences. Abigail was already on her earpiece, speaking rapid-fire instructions to her team. Attention all stations. Service suspension in effect immediately. Secure all payments. Contact vendor supervisors. The catering staff began clearing tables with professional efficiency. The musicians stopped mid-song, instruments lowering in confusion. Harrison's face had gone red. This is outrageous. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. On what grounds? Caleb stepped forward, portfolio still open. My client fulfilled his contractual obligations. He paid $75,000 up front. The final payment was contingent on satisfactory service completion. The service was satisfactory. Was it? I asked. Because part of the service I paid for was treating my family with respect. That didn't happen. The ballroom transformed from celebration to chaos in minutes. Guests gathered their belongings, some rushing for the exits, others lingering to witness the unfolding drama. The Wallaces huddled in urgent conversation, their faces tight with controlled panic. Emily Thompson approached me, her expression somber. Logan, I should have said something earlier when I realized what was happening. No apology needed, Emily. You're not responsible for my daughter's choices. But other guests were reacting differently. I caught fragments of heated conversations. How could she do that to her own father? The Wallaces should have known better. Absolutely disgraceful. Harper from the magazine was interviewing guests, her photographer capturing every moment of the collapse. This wouldn't just be local gossip. It would be documented, published, permanent. Charlotte collapsed into a chair, her perfect wedding dress pooling around her like spilled wine. 24 years, she sobbed. You're throwing away 24 years over one night. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. You already did that when you told 280 people I was dead. The venue was emptying rapidly now. Guests gathered their belongings and headed for the exits, some stopping to offer quiet words of support, others clearly eager to escape the family drama. The old money crowd particularly seemed uncomfortable with such raw displays of emotion. Harrison made one final attempt at control. Foster, let's be reasonable. Name your price. Whatever you want. Money, connections, contracts. We can work this out. You think this is about money? Everything's about money. That's where you're wrong. I folded the torn check pieces and put them in my pocket. This is about something you can't buy, respect. Abigail approached me one last time. "Mr. Foster, for the record, your account shows the venue rental and initial catering payments were processed successfully. The incomplete final payment voids the extended service agreement, but the facility usage through 10 p.m. remains valid." Professional to the end. Abigail understood contracts. "Thank you, Abigail. You and your staff have been excellent." The photographer packed his equipment. The musicians loaded their instruments. Within 30 minutes, the wedding reception had transformed from elegant celebration to empty ballroom. Charlotte sat alone at table 1. Her husband and new in-laws huddled in urgent conversation near the exit. Mason kept glancing at his wife with something that looked like disappointment, maybe even disgust. This wasn't the sophisticated family he thought he was marrying into. Julian Stiles, the fake father, had slipped out early, probably recognizing that his role in the evening's deception wouldn't reflect well on his reputation. "Charlotte," I said, approaching her table. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you happy now? You've ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped paying for it." She wiped her face with a napkin that probably cost more than most people's dinner. 25 years building your precious business, and you destroy it all in one night. "My business will be fine. It's built on real relationships with clients who value honest craftsmanship. But your marriage?" I glanced toward the Wallaces, who were still in heated discussion. "That might be a different story." Mason was gesturing angrily at his father, his voice carrying across the now empty ballroom. "You said you'd handled the financial arrangements. You said everything was covered." "We assumed," Harrison began. "You assumed wrong," Mason snapped. "Do you have any idea how this looks? My wife's father just publicly humiliated our entire family." Charlotte flinched at the word humiliated. "The magazine reporter got everything," Mason continued. "Photos, quotes, financial details. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Bethesda will know we hosted a wedding we couldn't pay for." That was the real wound, not that Charlotte had lied about her family. Rich people lie about inconvenient relatives all the time. The problem was that the lie had been exposed publicly, dramatically, with evidence. In their world, image was everything, and their image was now permanently tarnished. Caleb packed his portfolio. "Logan, legally speaking, you're completely protected. All contracts were properly executed. The payment structure was clearly defined. No court would find fault with your actions." "Thanks, Caleb. But personally speaking," he added quietly, "that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most devastating. Maybe both." Charlotte stood slowly, her dress rustling in the empty ballroom. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait for me to come home from the workshop, eager to show me her latest drawing. "I loved you," she said. "Despite everything, I loved you." Past tense. "You just destroyed my marriage before it even started." "No, Charlotte," I said. "You did that when you chose shame over family. I just made the consequences visible." It's been 3 months since that fateful wedding day. The dust has settled. But the landscape of my family has changed forever. After the reception, Melissa and Connor left immediately for their honeymoon. A trip I later learned was downgraded from their original plans. They needed to adjust their budget now that my financial support had been withdrawn. I didn't hear from either of them for weeks. My relationship with Elaine became strained. Though she understood my feelings, she felt I could have handled things differently. "There are some bells you can't unring, David," she told me one night as we sat on our porch, the summer air heavy between us. She wasn't wrong. I'd made my point. But at what cost? The first contact came in the form of a text from Melissa. "Can we talk?" Simple, direct, and loaded with unspoken weight. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the entitled bride, replaced by someone who looked humbled. She'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "Dad," she began, her voice catching, "I've spent weeks trying to figure out what to say to you." I waited, giving her the space to continue. "What I did was inexcusable," she said finally. "I convinced myself that I was protecting Connor's family's pride, that I was building bridges, but really, I was ashamed." "Ashamed of what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Of where we came from. Of not being good enough for the Prestons." She looked down at her coffee. "Connor's mother made these little comments about our neighborhood, about your job, and instead of defending us, I started creating this fiction." The admission hit me like a physical blow. All those years of working extra shifts, of saving every penny to give her opportunities, and she'd been ashamed? "The lie just grew," she continued. "And then Connor's parents offered to pay for part of the wedding, and I panicked. I couldn't admit that you were already covering most of it. So I pretended you weren't involved at all. And Connor went along with this? He didn't know the full extent until that night. He was furious with me." Her eyes welled up. "We almost didn't make it, Dad. He said he couldn't trust me." I felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. Trust is hard to rebuild once it's broken. "I know that now," she whispered. "That's why I'm here." We talked for hours that day. Really talked, in a way we hadn't since she was a teenager. She explained how she'd gotten caught in a web of social climbing and insecurity. How Connor's family had certain expectations and she'd been desperate to meet them. "But that's no excuse," she said firmly. "What I did to you was cruel and ungrateful. And I'm so sorry." I won't pretend forgiveness came easily. It didn't. But seeing her genuine remorse, her willingness to face what she'd done, that was a start. Connor reached out separately, apologizing for not questioning Melissa's story sooner. "I should have known something wasn't right," he told me. "No father who cared as much as you obviously did would just step aside." Interestingly, his parents also contacted me. Their message was less apologetic and more explanatory. They claimed they'd been misled by Melissa and had no intention of disrespecting me. Whether that was true or just damage control, I'll never know for certain. The most surprising development came from Elaine. After weeks of careful consideration, she suggested family counseling. Not to excuse what happened, she clarified, but to understand it and move forward. Initially, I resisted. Why should I have to sit in therapy because my daughter lied? But Elaine's gentle persistence won out. "This isn't just about Melissa's actions," she said. "It's about healing our family." Our first session was awkward and tense. But as weeks passed, we began to unpack years of unspoken expectations, misunderstandings, and yes, my own workaholic tendencies that had sometimes left emotional gaps in our relationship. I'm not saying what Melissa did was justified. It wasn't. But I've come to understand it better. Today, we're rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries and honest communication. Melissa and Connor come for dinner once a month. We're not back to where we were before, and maybe we never will be. But we're creating something new from the ashes of what was destroyed. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that family, real family, isn't about money or status, or keeping up appearances. It's about showing up, telling the truth, and doing the hard work of loving each other through mistakes and growth alike. So what would you have done in my position? Would you have kept quiet at the wedding, swallowed your pride, and paid the bill? Or would you have exposed the lie, even knowing it might permanently damage your relationship with your child? There are no easy answers here. Family dynamics are complicated, and the line between standing up for yourself and causing unnecessary pain isn't always clear. What I know now is that both silence and confrontation come with costs. The question is, which price you're willing to pay. In my case, I couldn't accept being erased from my daughter's narrative. The public humiliation of being treated like a stranger at an event I largely funded was too much to bear. My confrontation forced the truth into the open, painful as it was. But I've also had to accept that my approach burned bridges that have taken months to begin rebuilding. There might have been a middle path I didn't see in the heat of the moment. If you're facing a similar situation, whether with family, friends, or colleagues, I urge you to consider not just your justified anger, but also your desired outcome. What do you want the relationship to look like after the dust settles? Is there a way to stand your ground while leaving room for reconciliation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you loved betrayed your trust? How did you handle it? What would you have done differently? And if you found value in my story, please consider subscribing to this channel. I share these personal experiences not for sympathy or validation, but because I believe in the power of collective wisdom. Your perspectives help me, and others watching, navigate life's complicated relationships. Remember, even the most painful family conflicts can lead to growth and deeper understanding if we're willing to do the difficult work of honest communication. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, this is David signing off, a little wiser, a little more compassionate, and still learning every day what it means to be a parent in this complicated world. Before I wrap up today's story, I want to thank each of you for taking this journey with me. Your support means everything to this channel. If this story resonated with you in any way, whether you've experienced family betrayal yourself or you're navigating complicated relationships with your own children, please hit that like button. It helps others find this content who might need to hear they're not alone. And speaking of not being alone, our community in the comments section is one of the most supportive places on YouTube. Share your thoughts, your own experiences, or even your disagreements with how I handled things. The conversation that happens below these videos is often as valuable as the stories themselves. For those of you who are new here, welcome to our storytelling family. I share new stories every Wednesday and Sunday, focusing on real-life family dynamics, the unexpected turns our relationships take, and the lessons we learn along the way. If that sounds like content you'd value, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Next, I'll be sharing a story about inheritance disputes that tore apart 3 generations of a family, and the surprising resolution that brought healing decades later. It's a powerful reminder that it's never too late to choose reconciliation. Until then, remember that family relationships are complex, messy, and imperfect, just like all of us. The courage to face difficult truths, the strength to set healthy boundaries, and the grace to forgive are gifts we give not just to others, but to ourselves.